The sterile hum of fluorescent lights filled the office, but it was the oppressive silence that weighed down on Tasha. She sat at her desk, a file folder clutched in her hands, as her eyes darted from the window to the door. She had always known something was off in the way the company treated her. Her ideas were ignored in meetings, her emails left unanswered, her promotions always just out of reach. But today, as the cold stare of her manager, Charles, lingered on her from across the room, it was different. "You really shouldn't speak up, Tasha," he said. His voice a slick mix of condescension and control. "It's not your place to question the system. Just do your job." The words hit like a slap, and Tasha's pulse quickened. She had only asked about the company's diversity initiative, something she had been pushing for months. Instead of an answer, she had been met with a reprimand. The other employees around her were silent, their eyes glued to their screens, pretending not to hear the exchange. But it was clear. They knew. Tasha's hands trembled, but she steadied herself. The injustice, the suffocating weight of it, was too much. She had given them her loyalty, her hard work, and all they had given her in return was a quiet, systemic cruelty. As she opened her mouth to say something, to finally stand up, the door opened and her fate was sealed. "Tasha." Charles's voice was colder now. "You're fired." The words rang in the air as she blinked in disbelief. No, this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Tasha Carter sat in the conference room, her fingers tapping against the cool, sleek surface of the table. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound as she surveyed the room full of executives and senior managers at Harrison and King Financial Services. It wasn't the first time she had been in a meeting like this, but something felt different today. The usual calm before the storm was gone. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken weight that she couldn't shake. Charles, the senior VP, stood at the head of the table, droning on about their latest initiative, a new program to improve diversity and inclusion in the company. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. Tasha fought the urge to roll her eyes as he outlined the glossy objectives that felt like little more than corporate lip service. "Diversity is key to our success," Charles said with his usual practiced smile. "And we are committed to creating an environment where everyone feels valued." Tasha knew the drill. Every year there was a new diversity initiative. Each one sounded good on paper, but when it came down to actual changes, nothing ever happened. The hiring practices never changed. The promotions were always given to those who looked like Charles, white, privileged, and oblivious to the subtle, persistent forms of racism that ran rampant in the company. Her heart beat a little faster as she raised her hand, feeling the familiar pang of anxiety in her chest. But today she couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. "Excuse me," Tasha said, her voice cutting through the sterile silence of the room. "How exactly does this initiative address the racial disparities in the company's leadership roles? I mean, it's great to talk about diversity, but if there's no real effort to address the systemic racism that exists, then these programs are just window dressing." A few heads turned, and Charles's smile faltered for just a second. The room seemed to shrink, all eyes shifting between Tasha and the man at the head of the table. There it was, the uncomfortable silence. The shift from rehearsed politeness to something colder, something more deliberate. Tasha's pulse raced. She knew she had touched a nerve. Charles's eyes narrowed slightly, and he adjusted the papers in front of him. "Tasha," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge, "you really shouldn't speak up like that. It's not your place to question the system. Just do your job." The words hit harder than she expected. A sharp slap, disguised as a calm directive. She could feel the sting, but she refused to flinch. He had said it so casually, like he had done it 1,000 times before. He had just reminded her of her place. Tasha forced a tight smile, but the sting lingered. Her hands clenched into fists on the table, her knuckles white. She wanted to say something, anything to put him in his place. But instead she bit her tongue, her gaze flickering to her colleagues sitting around the table. None of them were looking at her, not really. They were avoiding her eyes, pretending they hadn't heard what had just been said. The weight of it all, being treated like she didn't matter, like her voice didn't matter, pressed down on her chest. The injustice wasn't just in that moment. It was in every moment she had spent in this room, in this company. The way her ideas were dismissed, the way her colleagues ignored her, the way her blackness had always been an obstacle in a company that prided itself on diversity. As Charles droned on, continuing the meeting like nothing had happened, Tasha's mind raced. There was no more pretending, no more quiet acquiescence. She was done. The meeting dragged on for another hour, but Tasha couldn't focus. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of frustration and anger. She knew she had to speak up. She had to do something. But what? How could she fight back against a system that had been built to keep her down? Just as the meeting ended, Charles motioned for her to stay behind. Her stomach twisted in knots. "Tasha," he said, leaning against the table, his arms crossed. "You've been a good employee, but I think it's time for you to go." Her heart sank. "What? We're letting you go," he said, his tone as cold as ice. "You're just not a good fit here anymore." Tasha's mind raced. Fired. Just like that. She hadn't even been given a chance to explain herself, to defend what she had said. But as the weight of the words settled in, a strange sense of clarity washed over her. "You can't do this," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and anger. "I've worked here for 5 years. I've given everything to this company." Charles just shrugged. "Things change. People change. You've made it clear that you're not happy here. Maybe it's time for you to find another place where you feel more comfortable." Comfortable. That word, that casual dismissal of everything she had fought for, made her blood boil. He had reduced her to nothing. Just another black woman who didn't know her place. Tasha stood up, the anger swelling inside her. She knew what had just happened. It wasn't about her performance. It wasn't about anything she had done. It was about the color of her skin, about the threat she posed when she dared to speak out. The door to the conference room swung open, and Charles's secretary entered, her eyes avoiding Tasha's. "Tasha, please come with me. We'll get your things." Tasha nodded, her chest tightening. But as she walked out of the room, her mind was already shifting into a different gear. She wasn't going to let this slide. She wasn't going to let Charles or this company get away with it. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Tasha stormed out of Harrison and King Financial Services, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She tried to breathe, to calm the surge of fury that twisted in her chest, but each step only intensified the fire within her. The doors swung open, and the cool air of the city greeted her, but it couldn't quell the heat building inside her. The moment she stepped outside, Tasha's phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't even need to check the name on the screen. It was Danielle, her best friend, who had always had her back. Tasha's thumb slid across the screen, unlocking the phone. "Are you okay?" Danielle's text read, followed by a string of question marks and exclamation points. Tasha let out a shaky breath, staring at the message for a moment before typing back quickly. "They just fired me," she wrote. "Charles. He didn't even let me finish talking. Just like that, I'm out." The response came in seconds. "You need to fight back. This is not okay. Don't let them get away with it." Tasha stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keys. Fight back. How? She didn't have the resources, the connections. They had all the power. She had always believed that being good at her job would be enough, that if she just worked harder, kept her head down, she would eventually get the recognition she deserved. But it was all a lie. A cruel, suffocating lie. "Did you see the way he said it?" she texted back. "Like it was nothing. Just a flick of the wrist and I'm gone." There was a long pause before Danielle responded. "This is bigger than just you, Tasha. You know that, right? This isn't just about a job. They're using you to send a message to everyone else. And you can't let them." Tasha leaned against the side of the building, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The anger still simmered inside her, but it was now mixed with something else, an unfamiliar feeling, a sense of clarity. If she wasn't going to fight for herself, Then who would? I know, she typed back, her hand steadying. But I'm not going to sit back and let them destroy me. Not anymore. I'm going to expose them. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about this place. I'll make them pay. Her heart thudded in her chest as she hit send. For the first time since the firing, Tasha felt something other than defeat. She felt purpose. That night, as Tasha sat in her cramped apartment, staring at the pile of paperwork from her years at Harrison and King, she felt like an outsider in her own life. The room was dim, only the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating the cluttered table in front of her. She had taken the rest of the afternoon off to process, but now she couldn't sit still. She was pacing the floor, unable to focus on anything except the gnawing need for action. Her phone sat on the table, buzzing sporadically with messages of support from friends and former colleagues. But none of that was enough. She had to do something concrete. Something that would make the company feel the same sting she had just experienced. As she skimmed through the pile of documents, performance reviews, emails from her manager, and notes from meetings, it became clear there was something much bigger going on beneath the surface of the company. Something far darker than Charles's condescending dismissal. It wasn't just about her. It was about the way Harrison and King treated black employees, like they were invisible or expendable. The subtle racism, the unspoken bias, the constant feeling of being watched but never fully seen. Then she found it. A thread of emails, hidden in the middle of a quarterly report, discussing internal promotions. There, in black and white, was proof of what she had suspected all along. Black employees were systematically overlooked for leadership positions, even when they were more qualified than their white counterparts. Why hire black candidates for senior roles? One of the emails read. They're too likely to make waves in a mostly white environment. We need people who know how to play the game, who blend in. Tasha's hands shook as she read the words again, each sentence more damning than the last. The racism was woven so deeply into the fabric of the company that it was almost invisible, unless you knew where to look. She sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. This was it. This was the evidence she needed. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. This was about exposing an entire system of injustice that had been quietly thriving for years. The next morning, Tasha sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. She had already drafted an email to the local news station, explaining the situation and offering to meet with a reporter. She knew that if she was going to go public with this, she needed to be strategic. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and the entire effort could backfire. As her fingers hovered over the keyboard, Tasha hesitated for a moment. This was big. This wasn't just about getting back at Charles or the company. It was about calling out a system that had been hurting people like her for far too long. She hit send. Within hours, Tasha received a response from the reporter, agreeing to meet with her. The next few days passed in a blur. More documents sent, more meetings scheduled. The wheels were in motion. It was happening. But as Tasha prepared for her first interview with a reporter, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more dangerous. Harrison and King was a powerful company. They had the resources to fight back, to discredit her. But no matter how much they tried, Tasha knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't be silenced. She was no longer just a woman looking for justice. She was a force to be reckoned with. Tasha sat at her kitchen table, a stack of documents and a half-empty cup of coffee in front of her. She felt the weight of each page she flipped through, each email, each report. They weren't just pieces of paper, they were proof. Proof of the system that had kept her down for years. Proof that Harrison and King had manipulated the system to maintain a status quo built on racial inequality. As the morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, Tasha's phone buzzed with another message from Danielle. It was a brief text, but it hit with a sense of urgency. Have you spoken to the lawyer yet? The reporter. We need to get ahead of this before they come after you. Tasha paused, staring at the words. She had been hesitant about moving forward with legal action. She had the evidence, but could she really win against a corporation like Harrison and King? They had resources she couldn't even begin to comprehend. But then again, she had something they didn't, a voice. A truth they couldn't hide forever. Taking a deep breath, she dialed the number for the lawyer Danielle had recommended. She had to know if she could go through with this. She had to understand her options. An hour later, Tasha sat across from an attorney in a modest office that smelled of old books and coffee. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Lauren, listened intently as Tasha detailed everything. The subtle racism, the exclusion from leadership roles, the crushing weight of microaggressions, and the firing. When Tasha finished, Lauren didn't speak immediately. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled, her gaze considering. "You have a strong case," Lauren said, her voice calm but firm. "Harrison and King is in a lot of trouble if you go public with what you know. This email thread you found, this is gold. It's direct evidence of discrimination. You're not just fighting for your job, you're fighting for a systemic change in the workplace." Tasha felt a small flicker of hope rise in her chest. But then reality set in. "What's the catch? How long will this take? I don't want to be strung along for years." Lauren nodded, acknowledging the weight of her question. "It could take time, but we can move fast on the legal front. However, there's no guarantee they won't retaliate. We need to be prepared for that. They have the money and power to make your life difficult." Tasha clenched her jaw, her eyes flashing with determination. "I don't care what they do. They can't keep getting away with this. It's time they pay." Lauren gave her a small smile. "Good. But I'm going to tell you this up front. If we go to court, we also need to be prepared for the media to get involved. They'll want to spin it however they can. You could be painted as the disgruntled employee, as someone just looking for a payout." Tasha had already anticipated that. "I'm ready for it," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I won't let them paint me as a villain. I'll make sure the truth gets out." Lauren nodded. "Then we'll file the suit. But first we'll need to organize everything you have. Every email, every report, every instance of mistreatment. It's not just about showing that they discriminated against you. It's about showing that it's a pattern." Tasha felt a sharp sense of clarity. This was it. This was her chance to expose the rot at the heart of Harrison and King. She had always known something was off, but now she had the chance to prove it. Later that day, Tasha sat in a local coffee shop with Danielle, going over the strategy. "So, what's the plan?" Danielle asked, leaning forward, her eyes wide with curiosity. Tasha took a deep breath. "I'm going to expose everything. The emails, the bias, the way they've systematically ignored people of color for promotions. But we can't just go in guns blazing. I need to get everything in order first, talk to the reporter again, and make sure we have the right contacts. We need this to hit hard and fast." Danielle's expression softened with concern. "Are you sure you're ready for this? You're about to take on one of the biggest companies in the city." Tasha looked at her friend, a tight smile on her lips. "I have no choice. Can't just walk away from this. I've spent too many years watching others get promoted while I was passed over. I've stayed quiet for too long. This isn't just about me anymore." Danielle nodded, her eyes full of respect. "You've got this. You've always had the strength, Tasha. Just don't forget that you're not alone in this. I'm with you every step of the way." The next few days felt like a blur. Tasha spent hours at her desk, sorting through documents, piecing together the full extent of Harrison and King's discrimination. Each email, each report was another nail in the coffin. She could feel the weight of what she was doing, the importance of every decision. But at the same time there was something freeing about it. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting for a promotion or a raise. She was fighting for something bigger, justice. By the time Tasha met with the reporter from the local news station, she had her case lined up. The evidence was overwhelming. The reporter, a woman named Mia, listened intently, her expression serious as Tasha laid everything out. The discrimination, the cover-ups, the systemic inequality. It was all there, ready to be exposed. "So, what's next?" Mia asked after a long silence. Tasha took a deep breath, her eyes hardening with determination. "We go public. We make sure the world knows what's been going on behind closed doors. Mia nodded. It's going to be big. But are you prepared for the fallout? They'll come for you, Tasha. Tasha met her gaze. Let them. I'm ready. That night, Tasha lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. Harrison and King would not go down easily. But she had something they couldn't take away, her truth. And she was ready to make it known. The next day, Tasha would make the call that would change everything. She was no longer just an employee of Harrison and King. She was a force of change. And there was no turning back now. The morning light felt too bright, too harsh, as Tasha sat in her apartment, staring at her laptop screen. The email she had drafted to the reporter the night before was still open, a blinking cursor awaiting her final decision. The weight of her next move pressed down on her chest, expose everything, all the evidence she had gathered, to the world. She knew once the story hit, there would be no going back. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Subject: Whistleblower Statement. Discrimination at Harrison and King Financial Services. She could feel the weight of her decision in her bones. This wasn't just a corporate complaint. This wasn't just about the injustice done to her. This was about something much bigger. The exposure of a toxic corporate culture built on years of systemic racism, one that reached beyond her experience, beyond just her company. It was about revealing how deeply embedded this kind of treatment was in workplaces everywhere. Tasha pressed send. The moment she hit the button, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Danielle, who had been eagerly waiting to hear back from the reporter. Did you do it? Tasha quickly typed back. Yes. It's done. Her hands trembled as she looked back at the screen. She could already feel the storm beginning to build on the horizon, though she hadn't yet seen its full force. Her mind raced with a million thoughts. Would they try to silence her? Would they discredit her? She had already thought about the ways Harrison and King could retaliate. More legal threats, more personal attacks, smear campaigns. She wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy. But she was determined. By the time Tasha's phone rang an hour later, her nerves were on edge. The local news station had reached out. Ms. Carter. The voice on the other end was warm, professional, but there was an underlying urgency to it. This is Mia Jones from Channel 8 News. I just wanted to confirm that we received the information you sent over. We're preparing a segment on the story. It's big, Tasha. People need to know what's been happening at Harrison and King. Tasha's heart pounded. I'm ready. Let's do this. Mia's voice softened. We're going to run the story tonight. The segment will air in the 7 p.m. news block. You'll be featured, but we'll need to know if you're available for a live interview afterward. We want to get your side to make sure we're covering all angles. This will go national. Tasha's mouth went dry. She had been expecting the story to make a ripple, but this was bigger than she could have imagined. I'll be there, she said, forcing the words out. You've got my full statement. The day felt like it was dragging on, every moment stretching longer than the last. When 7 p.m. finally rolled around, Tasha found herself glued to the TV in her living room. Her hands clenched into fists in her lap. The reporter's face appeared on screen, the familiar Channel 8 logo glowing beside her. Good evening, Mia began. Tonight's top story. Accusations of racial discrimination at one of the city's largest financial institutions, Harrison and King Financial Services. The company, which claims to promote diversity and inclusion, is now facing a whistleblower lawsuit from former employee Tasha Carter, who says the company's leadership positions have been systematically closed off to people of color. Tasha's breath caught in her throat as the screen shifted, showing the email she had uncovered, the smoking gun that proved the company's policies were not just discriminatory but intentional. Her stomach turned as she watched her own face flash across the screen, a brief clip from the interview they'd conducted earlier that day. Here's what Ms. Carter had to say in our interview, Mia's voice echoed. Tasha's voice filled the room, steady and unwavering as she recounted the systematic barriers she had faced during her years at Harrison and King. I had to work twice as hard, only to be passed over for leadership roles time and time again. And it wasn't because I wasn't qualified. It was because of the color of my skin. The footage played back her interview, the raw emotion in her voice making the injustice feel real to anyone watching. Tasha had expected the sting of speaking her truth to be difficult, but hearing it broadcasted to thousands, maybe millions, made the weight of it all even more intense. But it wasn't just me, Tasha continued in the clip. I'm one person. But there are countless others out there who have been ignored, overlooked, and shoved aside because of institutionalized racism. It's time for this company to be held accountable. The news segment concluded, and Tasha turned off the TV, her heart racing in her chest. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also powerful. It was like a fire had been lit, a fire that couldn't be extinguished. By the time Tasha's phone buzzed with a new message, the news had gone viral. The story was everywhere. Social media exploded with comments, supportive messages flooding in from people who had been following her story. But there were also threats, trolls calling her a liar, people accusing her of being a disgruntled employee, of wanting attention. She had expected it, but the vitriol still stung. Danielle's name flashed on her phone, and Tasha quickly picked up. "You did it, girl." Danielle's voice came through, practically vibrating with excitement. "The story's everywhere. The company's being dragged through the mud right now." Tasha felt a lump form in her throat. "I know. It's surreal." Danielle paused for a moment. "Are you ready for what's coming next? Because you know they're going to fight back, right? They're not just going to let you walk away from this." Tasha glanced at the phone in her hand, her reflection staring back at her from the screen. "Let them come. I'm not backing down now." Later that night, as Tasha scrolled through the endless stream of notifications, she saw something that made her blood run cold. An official statement from Harrison and King. The company had already issued a carefully worded response, denying all allegations of discrimination and accusing Tasha of misrepresenting the facts. They claimed she had failed to meet performance expectations, and left of her own accord after multiple discussions regarding her future with the company. Tasha clenched her jaw, her anger flaring. This wasn't just about her career anymore. This was about their attempt to bury the truth. She had anticipated the company's response, the legal threats, the lies. But now, more than ever, she had a choice. She could either let them bury her under their weight, or she could fight back with everything she had. Tasha's hands were steady as she typed a response, one final statement, not just for Harrison and King but for herself. "The truth will always come to light. You can deny it, you can attack my character, but you cannot erase the evidence. I'm not done yet." She pressed send. And in that moment she knew. The fight had only just begun. The days following the news segment felt like a whirlwind. Tasha barely had a chance to process the enormity of her actions before the full force of the backlash hit her. The story had gone viral, spreading like wildfire across social media, news outlets, and corporate circles. And with the exposure came an avalanche of comments, support but also hatred. The weight of it all sat heavy on her chest, and every time her phone buzzed, she braced herself for more venom. As the hours passed, her social media accounts became battlegrounds. Comment after comment scrolled by, some filled with praise, others with rage. Most were from strangers, but there were plenty from former colleagues at Harrison and King. One comment stood out. "You're just looking for attention. You weren't even a good employee. You don't deserve a platform." It was from a former teammate, one who had never really acknowledged Tasha's presence in the office, someone who always smiled politely but never really spoke up when she needed support. The comment stung more than she expected, the words biting deeper than the nameless trolls. Tasha stared at it for a long moment, the familiar feeling of isolation creeping in. Why had they never backed her? Why had they stayed silent when they saw the injustice? Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a comment. It was a message from her mother. "I saw the news. You're brave. Don't let them break you." Tasha's eyes stung. She closed the phone and set it down on the kitchen counter, taking a deep breath. There were moments when the fear threatened to swallow her, when the weight of what she had done felt too heavy to bear. But her mother's words reminded her why she was doing this. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been overlooked, silenced, and dismissed. Later that afternoon, Tasha received a call from her lawyer, Lauren, and the gravity in her voice made Tasha's stomach tighten. "Tasha, we need to talk about the fallout," Lauren said, her tone serious. "I've heard from a few sources. Harrison and King is gearing up to hit you with a defamation lawsuit. They're claiming you've misrepresented the facts to the press. They're going after your credibility, hard. They're going to try and make you look like a disgruntled former employee." Tasha stood up, pacing the small kitchen. "I knew it was coming," she muttered, her fists clenched. "But they can't rewrite the truth. I've got the evidence. I'm not backing down." Lauren was quiet for a moment. "I know, Tasha. But you need to be prepared. They have the resources to drag this out for years. They have a team of high-powered attorneys, and they'll do everything they can to destroy you in the public eye. This isn't just about the company anymore. It's about the narrative they're trying to create. They'll paint you as a liar, someone who's only after money and attention." Tasha felt a surge of anger. "Let them try. I'm not going to sit here and let them ruin me. I won't be silent. Not this time." Lauren sighed, but there was a note of admiration in her voice. "You're strong, Tasha. Just remember, you're going to need more than just the emails and interviews to win this. You need to stay calm, stay focused. You can't let them rattle you. And you might want to prepare for some personal attacks. They're going to try to dig into your past, find something they can use to discredit you." "I don't care," Tasha said, her voice firm. "I'm not letting them win. Not this time." Lauren's voice softened. "I'm with you, Tasha. We're going to take this one step at a time. But just remember, this fight is going to get ugly." Tasha hung up the phone, her mind spinning. She knew what she was up against. The company had the power to destroy her reputation, to twist the truth, to drown her in legal battles. But the thought of backing down, of letting them win without a fight, was more terrifying than anything they could throw her way. The next day, Tasha found herself at a small coffee shop, sitting across from an old colleague, Marcus. He had reached out to her after seeing the news segment, wanting to show his support. Marcus had been one of the few who had always been kind to her, never condescending, never dismissive. He was also one of the few black employees who had worked at Harrison and King, and the stories he shared with her over coffee only reinforced her suspicions about the company's culture. "They're scared, Tasha," Marcus said, leaning in as he spoke in a low voice. "You're hitting them where it hurts. They've been getting away with this for so long, they never thought someone would actually call them out. You're making noise, and they don't like it." Tasha nodded, but her brow furrowed. "But they'll fight back. They have the resources to bury me. They can use everything, my job performance, my past. They'll spin it however they want." Marcus shook his head. "You've got the truth on your side. And you've got more support than you think. There are people in that company who want things to change, but they're too scared to speak up. You're doing what they can't. You're giving them a voice." Tasha felt a flicker of hope. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She wasn't alone in this fight. There were people who believed in her cause, people who saw what she was seeing, who had experienced the same discrimination. She just had to stay strong. She couldn't let them break her. "I won't back down," she said, her voice steady. "I can't. Not when I know the truth. Not when I know there are others out there like me." Marcus smiled, offering her a supportive nod. "That's why I'm here. I'm with you, Tasha. We all are." The next few days were a blur of threats, phone calls, and legal paperwork. Harrison and King's legal team was relentless, sending demand letters, warning of potential lawsuits for defamation, and trying to scare her into silence. But Tasha didn't flinch. She kept her head high, her resolve unshaken. The company was trying to push her into a corner, but she wouldn't let them control her anymore. Every time she wanted to break down, to give up, she thought about the countless other people who had been silenced, who had been afraid to speak out. She thought about the people she had worked alongside for years, who had suffered in silence, and she knew this wasn't just her fight anymore. It was for everyone who had ever felt powerless. And so, as the pressure mounted, Tasha found a new sense of strength. She wasn't fighting for a settlement. She wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting for justice, for the truth to be heard, for the system to change. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The weeks following Tasha's public exposure of Harrison and King Financial Services felt like a blur of emails, phone calls, and meetings. The company's legal team had come after her with everything they had: threatening lawsuits, accusations of defamation, and pressure to settle out of court. But Tasha stood her ground. She refused to be intimidated, her determination hardening with each new legal challenge that came her way. One cold afternoon, she sat in a small conference room at the law firm, a stack of legal documents in front of her. Her lawyer, Lauren, had arranged for Tasha to meet with a legal team from a civil rights organization that was interested in her case. Tasha had known that bringing in more allies would give her a fighting chance, but the stakes were growing higher. Harrison and King wasn't just a small company. They were a giant in the industry, and they had deep pockets. But the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that this was the only way forward. If she didn't stand up now, who would? "Tasha, I want you to meet Jennifer and Ahmad," Lauren said as she introduced the two lawyers who had entered the room. They were both seasoned attorneys specializing in employment discrimination and civil rights law. Jennifer, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 40s, extended a firm handshake, her expression focused and serious. Ahmad, a younger man with an intense gaze, nodded as he took a seat beside her. "Thank you for meeting with us," Jennifer said. "We've been following your case, and we believe you have a strong legal claim here. The evidence you've gathered is impressive." Tasha felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been so focused on the potential roadblocks, on the countless threats that had come from the other side, that she hadn't fully allowed herself to believe that she could win. But hearing Jennifer's words gave her a new sense of hope. Lauren nodded in agreement. This case isn't just about one person. It's about exposing the systemic racism that's been allowed to thrive in corporate America for decades. Harrison and King may be trying to fight this with their legal resources, but they don't have the moral high ground here. They're the ones in the wrong. Ahmad spoke up, his voice calm but resolute. "We'll need to continue gathering evidence, but we've already got a compelling foundation. The emails you uncovered, Tasha, they're a smoking gun. The public is already paying attention, and we've got the momentum on our side. The media won't let them off the hook easily. We're going to take this all the way." Tasha's heart beat faster at the thought of going to trial. She knew it wouldn't be easy. It would be a public spectacle. There would be the constant pressuring, the media circus, and the inevitable smear campaign against her character. But she had come this far. She wasn't going to back down. "What do we need to do next?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. Jennifer smiled, clearly impressed by Tasha's resolve. "We'll start by filing a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. We've already drafted the paperwork, and once that's filed, we can move forward with the lawsuit. At the same time, we'll begin working with the media to continue keeping the pressure on Harrison and King. But we need to be prepared for their retaliation. They'll use every tactic in the book to discredit you." Tasha nodded, her mind already whirring with the steps ahead. But as much as the legal battles and media attention made her uneasy, she was also beginning to realize something important. This wasn't just about her career anymore. This was about something much larger. She had become the face of a movement, whether she had intended to or not. The following weeks were a constant back and forth of legal filings, strategy sessions, and news coverage. The lawsuit against Harrison and King had been filed, and the media coverage had exploded. News outlets, both local and national, were picking up the story, turning Tasha's fight into a symbol of resistance against corporate racism. But the backlash from the company's legal team was fierce. They started with a campaign of defamation, sending press releases to news outlets claiming that Tasha had been a poor performer, and that her termination was the result of years of inadequate work. The message was clear. They wanted to destroy her credibility. Tasha's heart sank when she saw the first article. It was a hit piece, full of half-truths and insinuations about her professional competence. "Look at this," Tasha said, showing the article to Lauren as they met at her apartment. The piece had been written by a freelance journalist who had clearly taken the company's side, quoting former colleagues who claimed Tasha had difficulty working with others and didn't have the leadership skills necessary for the role. Lauren frowned, her expression hardening. "They're going to try everything to tear you down. It's an old tactic, one that's been used on people of color for generations. Discredit them, isolate them, make their voices sound like lies. But we have the truth on our side, Tasha. And we've got to make sure we stay the course." Tasha's fingers curled into fists, the anger rising within her like a tidal wave. "I won't let them get away with it. They've already tried to bury me once. But I'm not going to let them rewrite the story." By the time the EEOC filed its official response, the pressure on Tasha had reached a boiling point. The public scrutiny was intense, and the constant media attention left her feeling drained, emotionally and mentally. She received anonymous threats, some subtle, others more overt, telling her to back off, warning her that she didn't know what she was getting herself into. But each message, each attempt to intimidate her, only fueled her resolve. One evening, as she sat in her apartment, scrolling through the latest round of articles, Tasha received a message from her mother. "I'm proud of you. No matter what happens, you're doing the right thing." The words filled her with warmth. Her mother had always been her greatest source of strength. And now, more than ever, Tasha needed that reminder. She was not alone. There were people who believed in her, people who were counting on her to stand strong. And so, as the legal battle began to unfold in the courts and in the press, Tasha reminded herself of why she was doing this. This fight wasn't just about her. It was for everyone who had been silenced. It was for the future, for a world where people didn't have to fight every day to prove their worth, to prove that their voices mattered. Tasha wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence as Tasha sat on the witness stand, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The room buzzed with anticipation. Today was the day that would determine the course of her fight. The media had turned out in full force, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling in their notebooks. This wasn't just another corporate lawsuit. This was about exposing the systemic racism at the heart of one of the city's most powerful financial institutions. Across from her, Harrison and King's legal team sat in their usual polished, intimidating formation, ready to tear apart everything she had worked for. Charles, her former boss, sat in the front row, his face a mask of arrogance and resentment. He had insisted on attending, no doubt to intimidate her further. The tension between them was palpable, his smugness a sharp contrast to the fire burning within her. Tasha's lawyer, Lauren, sat beside her, her expression calm but determined. They had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Tasha knew the pressure was immense. She wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was representing all the people who had been overlooked, silenced, and ignored because of their race. She couldn't afford to make a single mistake. Ms. Carter, the opposing attorney, a tall man with a sharp suit, began, his voice smooth as he stood to address the court. "You're claiming that Harrison and King Financial Services engaged in a pattern of racial discrimination, that your firing was the result of systemic racism within the company. But let's look at your history there, shall we? You've admitted that your performance was lacking, that you failed to meet expectations. Isn't that true?" The question cut through the air like a knife. Tasha felt her stomach tighten, but she didn't flinch. She had expected this line of questioning. They were going to attack her work ethic, attack her character. But she wasn't going to let them control the narrative. She had evidence, she had truth on her side. "I disagree," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "My performance was more than adequate. I did everything I was asked to do, and I did it well. The issue wasn't my work. It was the environment I was working in. I was constantly passed over for leadership roles, ignored in meetings, and my contributions were minimized. I was treated like I didn't belong." The lawyer smirked, trying to goad her. So, you're saying that you weren't promoted because of your race? That's a bold accusation, Ms. Carter. But the reality is, you didn't meet the company's performance standards, did you? Tasha squared her shoulders, her voice growing stronger. No, I didn't meet your standards. But that's because your standards were always stacked against me and other people of color. You didn't want people like me in leadership roles, no matter how qualified we were. You wanted people who fit your idea of what a leader should look like. People who look like you. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge, who had been watching the exchange with mild disinterest, raised an eyebrow. Tasha could feel the shift in the atmosphere. She had made her point. She had spoken the truth. And now she couldn't back down. The cross-examination continued for what felt like hours, but Tasha stood firm. Her lawyer Lauren had prepared her for the worst, but nothing could have prepared her for the barrage of personal attacks. They dug into her past jobs, past relationships, and even her social media history, trying to paint her as an unreliable, bitter employee who had a personal vendetta against the company. Tell me, Ms. Carter, the attorney pressed, why should the court believe you? What makes you any different from any other employee who didn't get promoted? You're just one person with a grievance. Tasha felt the familiar frustration bubbling inside her, but she didn't let it show. She leaned forward slightly, meeting the attorney's gaze. I'm not just one person with a grievance. I'm a person who's had to work twice as hard as my colleagues, just to be heard. I've watched as people who don't look like me get promoted over me, even when I've put in more work, more hours, more effort. And that's not a grievance. That's a reality that's been going on for years. That's a system that needs to change. Her words hung in the air, her conviction filling the room. She knew she wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for the countless others who had been too afraid, too powerless to speak up. This was their moment too. The attorney hesitated for a moment before continuing with his questions, but the damage had already been done. Tasha had planted a seed of doubt in the minds of everyone watching. The truth was undeniable, and the cracks in Harrison and King's defense were starting to show. As the day wore on, Tasha felt the weight of the trial bearing down on her. She had held her ground, but the emotional toll was beginning to show. The constant barrage of accusations, the personal attacks, the questioning of her integrity, it was all starting to take its toll. But as the afternoon drew to a close, Tasha's heart surged when Lauren leaned over and whispered, "You're doing great. Just a little longer." The judge adjourned for the day, and Tasha walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, despite the exhaustion gnawing at her bones. She knew the hardest part was still to come, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of relief. She had told her story. She had fought back. And no matter what happened next, she had stood up for what was right. That evening, as Tasha sat alone in her apartment, the weight of the day finally caught up with her. The adrenaline had worn off, and she felt the exhaustion seeping into her limbs. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Danielle. "You did amazing today. No matter what happens next, you've already won. The truth is out there, and it's not going away." Tasha smiled faintly, reading the message again. Danielle was right. The truth was out there. It had been spoken aloud in a room full of people who couldn't ignore it anymore. Harrison and King's facade was cracking, and the company had nowhere to hide. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The fight wasn't over, but she was closer to winning than she had ever been before. And this time she wasn't backing down. The court ruling came swiftly, though Tasha hardly felt ready for it. The weight of the last few months had drained her emotionally and physically, but the finality of the decision still hit her like a wave. The courtroom was packed when the judge delivered the verdict. Tasha had won. Harrison and King Financial Services was found guilty of discriminatory practices, and they were ordered to pay a hefty settlement for wrongful termination and the emotional distress caused by their actions. Tasha sat there, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to process the words that had just been spoken. For a moment, everything seemed surreal. The victory felt distant, almost as if it belonged to someone else. Yes, the company had been held accountable, but the journey to get there had taken so much out of her. The long hours in court, the media backlash, the personal attacks, it had all taken a toll. Lauren, sitting beside her, smiled, a look of quiet triumph in her eyes. You did it, Tasha. We did it. This is huge. But Tasha could only nod, her emotions swirling. She had won, but what did that mean? Was the victory worth the cost? She had exposed Harrison and King for what they were, but the battle had been grueling. She could feel the emotional scars lingering, the bruises that would take time to heal. The days that followed the ruling were a whirlwind of media appearances and interviews. The story was everywhere, and Tasha's victory was celebrated in the headlines. She was hailed as a hero, someone who had stood up for what was right despite the odds. Yet, as the news coverage continued, something in her heart remained unsettled. It wasn't the fame or the recognition. It was the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. In the quiet moments, Tasha reflected on what had been lost during this journey, the part of herself that had been consumed by the fight. She had given so much of her time, her energy, and her spirit to this cause. And while the victory was important, it wasn't enough to undo everything she had been through. The trauma she had endured couldn't be erased by a paycheck or a headline. One afternoon, Tasha found herself sitting on her couch, staring out of the window at the city below. The noise of the street was muffled by the glass, but it felt distant, like she wasn't a part of it anymore. Her phone buzzed with a new message, pulling her from her thoughts. It was from Danielle. Are you okay? You haven't been answering my calls. I know it's a lot, but I just wanted to check in. Tasha read the message, feeling a lump form in her throat. She hadn't been able to talk to anyone about how she was really feeling. She had been so focused on the fight, on taking down the system, that she hadn't stopped to consider what would happen after. Now that the battle had ended, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. The truth was, the aftermath of the case was harder than she had anticipated. The media had moved on to other stories, and the public's attention had shifted. But for Tasha, the scars remained. The emotional weight, the constant scrutiny, the loneliness. She didn't know how to carry it all. She dialed Danielle's number, and it only rang once before her friend picked up. Tasha, hey. Danielle's voice was warm and familiar. I was starting to get worried. How are you holding up? Tasha exhaled slowly, sinking further into the couch. I don't know, Dee. I thought winning would feel different. But now that it's over, I just feel so empty. Like I've given everything for this, and now it's just done. Danielle paused on the other end of the line. I get it. It's hard, especially when you've been so focused on the fight. But don't let it consume you, Tasha. You've done something amazing. You've changed things for so many people. That's not nothing. Tasha sniffled, wiping away a stray tear. I know. But it doesn't feel like enough. I thought once I exposed them, once I won, I'd feel better. But instead it feels like I've lost something. A part of myself that I don't know how to get back. Danielle's voice softened. You've been through something traumatic, Tasha. Course it's going to take time. But remember, you're not alone in this. You have me. You have your family. And you have a whole world of people who are inspired by you. Tasha took a deep breath. I know. I just wish I could turn it all off sometimes. All the noise, all the anger. It's still with me. You don't have to do this alone, Danielle said, her words gentle but firm. Take your time. Bill. You've earned it. Tasha took the next few weeks to step back from everything. She stopped answering every phone call, turned off the constant stream of news alerts, and spent time with her family. She allowed herself the space to breathe, to process what had happened, and to begin healing from the emotional trauma that had been inflicted on her throughout the process. Her mother was a constant source of support, offering words of comfort and encouragement. You've always been strong, Tasha. You've always known what's right, and you've never backed down. But it's okay to take a step back. It's okay to rest. One afternoon, Tasha found herself sitting on the porch of her mother's house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She had come home to visit, needing a quiet space to reflect on everything. As she sat there, surrounded by the peaceful stillness of nature, something inside her shifted. She realized that her journey hadn't been about one victory in court. It had been about reclaiming her power, her voice, and her dignity. She had fought, and she had won, not just against the company, but against the system that had tried to silence her. The scars would always be there, but they no longer defined her. She had won. And that was enough. Months passed, and the story of her case faded from the headlines, but Tasha knew that her fight had sparked something bigger. A movement. She began working with organizations focused on diversity and inclusion, using her voice to push for real change. Her pain had been turned into purpose, and with each step forward, she felt the weight of her past lighten. She would never forget the battle she had fought, but now she had a new mission: to ensure that others didn't have to fight the same fight. And for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The months after the case had ended seemed to blur into each other. Tasha had been thrust into a new chapter of her life, one that, at first, felt uncertain and unfamiliar. She had spent years fighting to be seen, to be heard, and now, in the aftermath of her legal victory, she was still learning how to navigate the complexities of a world that now looked at her as a symbol of resistance. A symbol of what could happen when someone refused to stay silent. One evening, Tasha sat at her desk in a small but vibrant office in downtown, a space she had carved out for herself. It was a place where she could focus on the work that truly mattered: consulting, speaking engagements, and working with organizations that champion diversity and inclusion in the workplace. The phone calls had slowed down, the news coverage had subsided, but her work was far from done. Her victory in court had brought about change, but there was still so much more to be done. The door to her office opened, and Danielle stepped in, holding a coffee cup in her hand. "You busy?" Danielle asked, her voice teasing. Tasha looked up from her papers, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm always busy, but I'm never too busy for you." Danielle made a face and rolled her eyes playfully. "You're such a workaholic. You can take a break, right?" Tasha laughed softly and gestured to the chair across from her. "I know. I just feel like there's so much left to do. The work is endless, and people are still hurting, still going through the same things I went through. I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to help." Danielle sat down and sipped her coffee. "You're doing more than enough. You've already changed so many lives. That court case, it was just the beginning. You're giving people the courage to speak out. You're making things better." Tasha's eyes softened, and for a moment, she allowed herself to pause and reflect. She had been so focused on the fight, on winning, on proving her point, that she hadn't truly allowed herself to recognize the magnitude of what she had accomplished. She had ignited a spark in others. She had made sure that the voices of those who had been silenced were heard. And now, she was helping to build a future where people of color could walk into any room, not just as employees but as equals. Tasha said quietly, "there are days when I wonder if it was worth it. The emotional toll, the exhaustion. It's hard to keep going when you feel like you've given so much of yourself. But then I see the impact it's had on people, and I know that it was." Danielle leaned forward, her voice firm but compassionate. "You didn't just fight for yourself, Tasha. You fought for so many others. That's why it matters. You're changing the system, piece by piece." Tasha nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a quiet sense of fulfillment. The weight she had carried for so long was still there, but it had shifted. It had become something else, something she could carry with pride, not shame. She had fought not for revenge but for justice, for herself, for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. A few days later, Tasha was invited to speak at a national diversity and inclusion conference. It was a pivotal moment, her first major public speaking engagement since the trial. The invitation had been a surprise, but it felt like the perfect opportunity to share her journey with a larger audience, to remind people that change was possible. The night before the conference, Tasha found herself standing in front of the mirror in her hotel room, adjusting her blazer. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman who had gone through the fire and emerged stronger. But even now, as she prepared to speak to hundreds of people, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety twist in her stomach. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. "You've got this," she reminded herself. "This is your moment. You're doing this for everyone who can't speak for themselves." The conference hall was packed the next morning. Tasha walked onto the stage, feeling the eyes of the audience on her. She had done this before, public speaking, sharing her story, but today felt different. This was more than just her story. This was a call to action. As she stood behind the podium, she gazed out at the audience, the faces of hundreds of people. People who had been through the same struggle she had, people who understood the weight of systemic racism in the workplace. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm here today because I was once like so many of you. Overlooked, silenced, made to feel like I didn't belong. But I didn't stay silent. I fought. And today, I'm here to tell you that you have the power to do the same." Tasha paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the crowd. She saw the faces of people nodding, people who knew exactly what she was talking about. "I fought for my voice to be heard, but I also fought for the voices of others, voices that have been silenced for far too long," she continued. "We need to stop pretending that things are okay. We need to stop accepting the status quo. If we want real change, we need to confront the systems that perpetuate inequality. And it starts with us right here, right now." The room was quiet as she spoke, her words resonating deeply with the audience. Tasha felt a surge of energy, a new kind of strength she hadn't felt before. This was where she belonged, on this stage, sharing her truth, empowering others to find their own voice. The conference was a success, and in the weeks that followed, Tasha continued to work with organizations across the country, helping them implement real diversity and inclusion strategies. She became a sought-after speaker, a symbol of change, and a force in the fight for racial equality in the workplace. But the journey wasn't over. Tasha knew that the work would never be done. There would always be more to fight for, more people to lift up. But as she looked out at the faces of the people who had been inspired by her, she felt a sense of peace. She had done what she set out to do. She had sparked a movement, and now she was leading it. The days blurred into weeks, and the months that followed Tasha's victory in the courtroom felt like a cascade of emotions she could hardly keep up with. She had become a symbol of resistance, of resilience, of change. But there were still moments, quiet moments, when she felt the weight of what she had been through. The trauma, the exhaustion, the aftermath of the fight. Those moments reminded her that the journey she had started was never going to be easy. It would never be over. Yet, as the new year arrived, there was a sense of renewal in Tasha's life. She had faced the fire, and now it was time to rebuild. It was time for a fresh start, not just for her career but for her soul. Tasha stood at the window of her new apartment, a space she had carefully chosen for its light, its openness, its sense of peace. The view was nothing extraordinary, just the quiet hum of the city below, but to her it felt like freedom. Freedom from the oppressive weight of the past. Freedom to live without the constant fear of retaliation, without the fear of being dragged back into the toxic world she had just left behind. She had spent months wrestling with the decision, but she had finally made it. She was stepping away from the corporate world. It was time for a new chapter, one where her passion, her energy, and her purpose could flourish in a way that aligned with the values she now held dear. The decision to leave the corporate world wasn't easy. It was a world that had shaped so much of who she was, despite how damaging it had been to her spirit. For years, Tasha had been driven by the belief that hard work would eventually pay off, that she could earn her place in the world. But the corporate machine had shattered that illusion. Now she was choosing to carve out a new path, one that allowed her to focus on her advocacy, her consulting work, and her passion for fostering real diversity and inclusion. She wanted to help other companies, individuals, and communities avoid the same pain she had endured. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about healing. Tasha spent her first few days in the apartment quietly, reconnecting with herself. She visited friends, spent time with her family, and reflected on the overwhelming amount of support she had received throughout her journey. But it wasn't just the support that mattered now. It was the lessons she had learned, the strength she had discovered within herself. She had come to realize that change was slow, and it had to be. The system wasn't going to transform overnight. But she could be part of that change. She could help lead the way. And as she began to settle into her new life, Tasha knew she was ready for the next challenge. Not just to lead, but to teach. Her first big project was a partnership with a well-known nonprofit that focused on creating safer, more inclusive workplaces for marginalized groups. It felt like the perfect fit, a place where her voice could make a real impact, and where she could use her experience to help other individuals and organizations navigate the complexities of racial discrimination. This wasn't about pointing fingers or laying blame. It was about creating sustainable change that would ensure that the next generation wouldn't have to fight the same battles Tasha had fought. As she met with the nonprofit's team for the first time, Tasha felt a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in years. The team was passionate, driven, and eager to tackle the very issues she had confronted. Their focus was clear: to create real, measurable change in how companies approach diversity, equity, and inclusion. They weren't just paying lip service, they were committed to action. Tasha felt like she had finally found her place. "Are you ready for this?" asked Lauren, who had become a close friend and mentor throughout Tasha's journey. They were sitting in a small conference room after a planning meeting with the nonprofit team. Lauren's words carried both curiosity and encouragement. Tasha smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "I think I'm finally ready. This feels right. It's time to do the work that really matters." In the months that followed, Tasha found herself working with a variety of organizations. From corporate firms trying to overhaul their diversity initiatives to grassroots organizations working with marginalized communities. Every project was different, every challenge unique. But each one was meaningful. She was no longer fighting to prove her worth. She was helping others find their own power, their own voice. And in doing so, Tasha realized that this was the work that had always been calling her. It wasn't easy. Never would be. But it was the work she had been destined to do. She spoke at conferences, sat on panels, and mentored young people of color who wanted to break into industries where they had been historically excluded. She used her platform to advocate for policies that promoted real diversity and inclusivity, and every success, every small victory, felt like a step closer to the world she wanted to help build. One day, as she sat in a cafe working on a new project, Tasha received an email from the nonprofit she had been partnering with. They were inviting her to be the keynote speaker at their annual event, a celebration of everything they had accomplished together over the past year. The email expressed their gratitude for her work, for her guidance, and for the impact she had made. Tasha sat back in her chair, letting out a soft laugh of disbelief. A year ago, she had been fired from her job, broken and disillusioned. She had fought back against a system that tried to erase her, and now she was being honored for the very thing she had once been punished for: speaking up. The irony wasn't lost on her, but it was a reminder that nothing worth having came without struggle. She had walked through fire, and now she was standing on the other side, stronger, wiser, and with a purpose that transcended anything she had ever imagined. The night of the event, Tasha stood backstage, preparing to speak. She had spoken in front of crowds before, but this time was different. This time she wasn't just telling her story. She was telling the story of everyone who had fought and would continue to fight for justice. She was telling the story of how one person's courage could ignite a revolution. The lights dimmed, and the crowd erupted in applause as Tasha walked onto the stage. She took a deep breath and looked out at the sea of faces. This was it. Her new beginning. "Good evening," she began, her voice strong and steady. "I'm here tonight not just as someone who has fought against the system, but as someone who believes in the power of change. We've come a long way, but we still have so much to do. The fight is far from over, but together we can create a world where everyone has a seat at the table." And as she spoke, Tasha realized that she had found something far greater than a career or a victory in court. She had found her calling, her true purpose. And this was only the beginning.